Before we begin the story, let us know where you're watching from by leaving a comment below. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the story, everyone. Elias Thornwood stood in the darkness of his penthouse office, the yellow divorce papers clutched in his trembling hands like a death sentence that had never been served. The storm outside Manhattan's financial district seemed to echo the tempest that had been raging in his soul for 3 decades. Violent, unforgiving, and utterly without mercy. At 50, he was worth more money than most small countries. He was a man who could topple governments with a phone call and destroy lives with a signature. The financial world called him ruthless, and they weren't wrong. He had built his empire on the frozen wasteland of his heart. Each billion earned through the calculated destruction of anything that dared to threaten his carefully constructed walls. But tonight, like every the 15th of October for the past 30 years, he wasn't the feared billionaire who made grown men weep in boardrooms. He was just a 20-year-old boy, again, holding the pieces of a love that had been his entire universe before it exploded into nothing. The papers bore the elegant signature of Isabella Montoya, a name that still made his chest tighten with a pain so sharp it felt like dying. Even now, he could remember everything about her with painful clarity. The way her laugh had sounded like music, how her dark eyes had promised him forever, and the silk of her raven hair when she whispered that she would love him until the stars fell from the sky. They had met during his senior year at Columbia, when his father's construction company was still thriving, and the Thornwood name meant something in New York society. Isabella had been the most beautiful woman he had ever seen, a goddess wrapped in Valentino and dreams, and somehow, impossibly, she had chosen him. For 2 years, they had been inseparable, their love the kind of passionate, all-consuming fire that poets wrote about and mortals died for. He had proposed on a beach in the Hamptons, going down on one knee in the sand as the sunset painted the sky in shades of promise. She had said yes with tears streaming down her perfect face. And for one shining moment, Elias had believed that he was the luckiest man alive. The wedding was planned for the spring. A lavish affair that would have rivaled a royal celebration. Isabella threw herself into the preparations with the enthusiasm of a woman who had found her fairy tale, and Elias would have given her anything she desired. He was drunk on love, dizzy with the certainty that he had found his soulmate, the woman who would bear his children and grow old beside him. But fairy tales, as Elias learned in the cruelest way possible, were just stories told to children who didn't yet understand that the world was a place designed to break your heart. The first crack in his perfect world came when his father's company began to struggle. A series of bad investments, a housing market downturn, and some unscrupulous partners had left Thornwood Construction bleeding money. What had once been a thriving business worth millions was suddenly drowning in debt, and bankruptcy loomed like a storm cloud on the horizon. Elias had been confident that love would conquer all, that Isabella would stand by him as they weathered the storm together. He had been young enough to believe that their love was stronger than money, deeper than social status, more eternal than the comfortable life she had always known. He had been a fool. The change in Isabella was subtle at first, a coolness in her touch, a distance in her eyes when she thought he wasn't looking. She began canceling dates, claiming headaches or prior commitments. Their conversations, once filled with laughter and dreams of the future, became stilted and awkward. When he tried to discuss the wedding plans, she would change the subject with a brightness that felt forced. But Elias, blinded by love and desperate to believe that their bond was unbreakable, convinced himself that she was just stressed about the wedding. He threw himself into trying to save his father's company, working 18-hour days and mortgaging his future to keep the business afloat. He was fighting for their life together, battling to preserve the world he wanted to give her. He never saw the betrayal coming. The end came on a night much like this one, rain lashing the windows, the sky weeping as if it knew what was about to happen. Elias had come home to their shared apartment, exhausted but hopeful, clutching a small victory in the form of a potential investor who might save the company. He had been planning to surprise Isabella with dinner and the good news to show her that he was still the man worthy of her love. Instead, he found her in the arms of Damien Hale. The image was burned into his memory like a brand. Isabella, his beautiful fiancée wrapped around his business rival, their bodies moving together with a passion that made a mockery of every moment she had ever shared with him. They were on the couch where he had proposed to her just months before, and the sound of her moans was like a knife twisting in his chest. When she saw him standing in the doorway, she didn't even have the grace to look ashamed. She simply disentangled herself from Damien with the casual indifference of a woman who had already made her choice, smoothing down her dress as if she were adjusting her appearance after a business meeting. "Elias," she said, her voice steady and cold, "we need to talk." The conversation that followed was a masterclass in cruelty. Isabella explained with the detached precision of a surgeon that she couldn't marry a man who was about to lose everything. She had needs, she said, standards that he could no longer meet. Damien could give her the life she deserved. The penthouse apartment, the designer clothes, the social status that came with dating a man who was succeeding rather than failing. "You understand, don't you?" she had asked, her dark eyes empty of the love that had once lived there. "I can't throw my life away on a fantasy." The divorce papers were served the next morning, along with a demand for half of everything he owned. By the time the lawyers were finished, Elias was left with nothing but debt and the bitter knowledge that the woman he had loved more than life itself had never loved him at all. His father's company collapsed 6 months later, taking with it the last remnants of the Thornwood family fortune. His father died of a heart attack 2 years after that, broken by the loss of everything he had built. Elias blamed himself, convinced that if he had been stronger, smarter, more worthy of love, none of it would have happened. The depression that followed was like drowning in darkness. For 2 years he barely functioned, surviving on rage and the desperate need to prove that he was not the weak, pathetic man that Isabella had discarded. He threw himself into rebuilding with the fury of a man possessed, working 20-hour days, making deals with a ruthlessness that shocked even his enemies. But success, when it came, was built on the foundation of his frozen heart. He trusted no one, loved no one, allowed no one close enough to hurt him again. Women were temporary distractions, business partners were tools to be used, and emotions were weaknesses to be eliminated. He hired male assistants, male executives, male staff whenever possible, and the few women who worked for him were treated with the cold professionalism of a man who had learned that the fairer sex was anything but fair. Now, standing in his tower of glass and steel, Elias was worth more than Isabella and Damien combined. He had destroyed Damien's business empire piece by piece over the years, a patient and methodical revenge that had left his former rival bankrupt and broken. He had heard through the social circles that Isabella's marriage had crumbled, that she was living off alimony and the fading remnants of her beauty. But none of it mattered. None of it filled the hollow space where his heart used to be. The clock on his desk chimed midnight, and Elias carefully folded the divorce papers back into their envelope, returning them to the safe where they lived, like a talisman of his pain. Tomorrow, he would be the Ice King again, feared and respected, and utterly alone. As he reached for his coat, preparing to leave the office that had become more of a home than his penthouse ever would be, Elias made the same vow he had made every the 15th of October for 30 years. "Never again will I let anyone close enough to destroy me." He had no idea that in less than 12 hours, a woman with eyes like starlight and a smile that could melt glaciers would walk into his building and change everything forever. The storm outside began to calm, as if the universe itself was holding its breath for what was about to come. But Elias Thornwood, the man who had forgotten how to hope, simply turned off the lights and walked into the night, carrying his broken heart like a burden he was destined to bear alone forever. Chapter 2. When dawn breaks through, there are angels who wear scrubs and save lives in hospitals. And then there are angels who wear cleaning uniforms and save souls in the quiet hours when the world sleeps. Aria Bellamy stepped off the subway at Wall Street Station, her heart heavy with the weight of impossible choices and the kind of exhaustion that came from loving someone too much to let them go. The October air was crisp with the promise of winter, and she pulled her thin jacket tighter around her shoulders as she made her way through the empty streets toward Thornwood Industries, the gleaming tower that represented her newest chance to earn the money that could save her grandmother's life. At 28, Aria had learned that life was a series of small miracles wrapped in enormous struggles. She worked 3 jobs, cleaning offices at night, serving coffee during the morning rush, and stocking shelves at a grocery store in the afternoons, and still barely made enough to cover her rent and send money to Trinidad, where her beloved grandmother, Eloise Sinclair, was fighting a losing battle against cancer. But despite the crushing weight of her responsibilities, despite the bone-deep weariness that came from sleeping only 4 hours a night, Arya carried herself with a grace that made people stop and stare. She had the kind of beauty that came from within. Warm brown eyes that sparkled with genuine kindness, a smile that could light up the darkest corners of despair, and a laugh that sounded like music, even when she was too tired to remember why she was laughing. Her grandmother had raised her with stories about the power of love, about how kindness was the only currency that mattered in this world, about how everyone, no matter how broken or bitter, deserved compassion. Elowen had taught her that cleaning wasn't just about removing dirt. It was about creating spaces where people could find peace, where they could breathe a little easier, where they could remember that the world still held beauty. Every surface you clean, every floor you polish, every window you make shine. Elowen would say in her melodious Caribbean accent, "You're not just working, baby girl. You're spreading love. You're making the world a little brighter for someone who might need that light to find their way home." Arya carried those words with her as she entered the marble lobby of Thornwood Industries. Her reflection multiplied in the polished surfaces that spoke of wealth beyond imagination. The building was a monument to success. 50 floors of glass and steel reaching toward the sky like a prayer made of ambition and dreams. The security guard, a kind-faced man named Javier, greeted her with the warmth reserved for someone who had earned respect through genuine decency. "Evening, Miss Bellamy. How's your grandmother doing?" "She's fighting," Arya replied, her voice carrying the weight of love and worry. "The doctors say the new treatment is showing promise, but—" She trailed off, unable to voice the fear that lived in her chest like a constant ache. Javier nodded with understanding. He had worked the night shift for 15 years, watching people come and go, and he had learned to recognize the ones who carried the world on their shoulders. "She's lucky to have you, miss. That kind of love, it's powerful medicine." Arya smiled, the expression transforming her tired features into something luminous. "Thank you, Javier." That's exactly what she would say. As she made her way to the service elevator, Arya's phone buzzed with a text from her roommate and best friend, Talia Evergreen. "Girl, you're working too hard. When's the last time you did something just for you? When's the last time you smiled because you wanted to, not because you had to?" Arya stared at the message, trying to remember the last time she had felt genuine joy instead of just gratitude for making it through another day. She couldn't remember, and that realization made her heart ache in a way that had nothing to do with her grandmother's illness. The executive floors of Thornwood Industries were a study in understated luxury, marble floors that gleamed like mirrors, artwork that cost more than most people made in a year, and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered breathtaking views of the city that never slept. But to Arya, it was just another workspace, another opportunity to practice the art of caring for others that her grandmother had taught her. She began her routine with the methodical precision of someone who took pride in their work, no matter how humble others might consider it. She emptied trash cans, wiped down surfaces, and polished everything until it gleamed. But she did it with a reverence that transformed the mundane into something sacred. As she worked, she hummed softly a lullaby her grandmother had sung to her as a child, a melody that spoke of home and love, and the unbreakable bonds that held families together across oceans and heartbreak. The song filled the empty corridors with warmth, turning the sterile corporate environment into something that felt almost alive. She was polishing the conference table on the 48th floor when she heard it, a sound that made her heart clench with recognition. Someone was crying, not the loud, dramatic tears of anger or frustration, but the quiet, desperate sobs of someone who had forgotten how to hope. Arya followed the sound to the corner office at the end of the hall, where a sliver of light escaped from under the door. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the handle. Her supervisor, Selena Whitaker, had been clear about the rules. Clean efficiently, don't disturb anyone, and absolutely never enter an office while someone was working. But Elowen's voice echoed in her mind. "Baby girl, rules are important, but compassion is sacred. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply show up for someone who's forgotten they deserve to be seen." Arya knocked softly, her voice gentle as she called out, "Excuse me, are you all right in there?" The crying stopped abruptly, replaced by the sound of someone trying to compose themselves. After a moment, a deep voice, rough with emotion, answered, "I'm fine. Just, please, just leave me alone." But Arya had spent her life learning to read the spaces between words, to hear the pain that people tried to hide behind politeness. This wasn't a man who wanted to be alone. This was a man who had forgotten that he didn't have to be. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said, her voice carrying the warmth of someone who had never met a stranger. "I'm Arya, and I was just cleaning out here. I couldn't help but notice that you sound like maybe you could use some company or maybe just a cup of coffee." There was a long silence, and then the sound of footsteps approaching the door. When it opened, Arya found herself looking up at a man who took her breath away, not because of his wealth or power, but because of the raw vulnerability in his eyes. Elias Thornwood stood in the doorway like a man who had forgotten how to be human. His dark hair was disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled, and his eyes, God, his eyes held the kind of pain that came from carrying the weight of the world alone for too long. He was handsome in the way that powerful men often were, but there was something broken in his expression that made Arya's heart ache with recognition. "You're new," he said, his voice carefully controlled, but not quite steady. "Yes, sir. This is my first night cleaning this floor." Arya met his gaze without flinching, her own eyes soft with the kind of compassion that couldn't be taught or faked. "I'm sorry if I disturbed you. You sounded like you might need someone to remind you that you're not alone." Elias stared at her, his carefully constructed walls crumbling in the face of her genuine kindness. This woman, this stranger, was looking at him not like the feared Ice King who could destroy companies with a word, but like a human being who deserved care and concern. "You don't know who I am," he said, and there was something almost desperate in his voice, as if he was afraid that once she knew, she would run. Arya smiled, the expression transforming her tired features into something radiant. "I know you're someone who's working too late and hurting too much, and that's all I need to know. Would you like me to make you some coffee? I noticed there's a machine in the break room, and my grandmother always said that coffee tastes better when it's made with caring hands." For the first time in 30 years, Elias found himself completely speechless. This woman, this angel disguised as a cleaning lady, was offering him kindness without expectation, compassion without condition, humanity without judgment. "I don't even know your name," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Arya Bellamy," she replied, extending her hand with the easy grace of someone who had never learned to be intimidated by power or wealth. "And you are?" "Elias," he said, taking her hand and feeling something electric pass between them. Just Elias. As their eyes met in the soft light of the office, something shifted between them. A recognition, a connection, a spark of possibility that neither had felt in years. The broken executive felt his frozen heart crack just a little, and for the first time in 30 years, he remembered what it felt like to hope. Arya, looking into the eyes of this wounded man, felt something stir in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with attraction and everything to do with recognition. She was looking at someone who had forgotten how to be loved, and she was someone who had been born to love. "It's nice to meet you, Elias," she said, her voice carrying the promise of dawn after the longest night. "Now, about that coffee." And as she turned to walk toward the break room, humming softly under her breath, Elias Thornwood stood frozen in his doorway, watching an angel in cleaning clothes carry light into the darkest corners of his soul. He didn't know it yet, but his life had just begun. Chapter 3. Heart's learning to trust. The heart is a stubborn thing. It will choose to love even when the mind screams warnings, even when logic demands retreat, even when 30 years of carefully constructed walls stand between you and the possibility of happiness. 6 weeks had passed since Arya Bellamy had walked into Elias Thornwood's life like dawn breaking over a wasteland. And every night since, he had found himself counting the hours until she arrived. The Ice King, the man who had built an empire on his ability to remain coldly detached from human emotion, now lived for the sound of her soft humming, echoing through the empty corridors of his building. He had never been a man who believed in miracles. But there was no other word for what Arya had brought into his world. She cleaned offices, but somehow she was polishing the tarnished corners of his soul. She emptied trash cans, but she was filling the hollow spaces in his chest with something that felt dangerously like hope. Elias found himself staying later and later at the office, manufacturing crises that required his immediate attention, scheduling calls with international clients that could only happen after midnight. His assistant, Finian Blackwood, had started giving him concerned looks, clearly puzzled by his boss's sudden dedication to working through the night. "Sir," Finian had said that morning, his voice carefully neutral, "you've been here past 2:00 the morning every night this week. Perhaps you should consider—" "I'm fine, Finian." Elias had cut him off, his tone sharper than necessary. "I work better at night, fewer distractions." But that was a lie. There were more distractions now than ever before. The anticipation of her arrival, the way his heart stuttered when he heard her voice, the impossible sweetness of their conversations that stretched long into the night. Arya was the most beautiful distraction he had ever known, and he was addicted to her presence like a man drowning in darkness, suddenly given glimpses of sunlight. She arrived at 11:30, as she did every night, her smile bright enough to illuminate the marble lobby. Elias watched from his office window as she exchanged pleasantries with Javier, the security guard, asking about his wife's recovery from surgery, remembering that his grandson had a baseball game that weekend. She treated everyone with the same genuine warmth, as if their stories mattered to her, as if their happiness was somehow connected to her own. When she stepped off the elevator on the 48th floor, Elias felt his pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with business deals or corporate conquests. She was wearing the same simple uniform she always wore, navy blue pants and a matching shirt with Thornwood Industries cleaning services embroidered on the pocket, but somehow she made it look elegant, as if she were dressed for a royal ball rather than a night of janitorial work. "Evening, Elias," she called out, her voice carrying the warmth of home and the promise of peace. "How was your day?" The question was simple, ordinary, the kind of thing that people asked each other a million times without thinking. But no one had asked Elias about his day in years, not in a way that suggested they actually cared about the answer. His employees feared him, his business associates respected him, and his family, well, his sister Mira tried. But even she had learned to keep her distance from the man he had become. "It was better once you arrived," he said, the words slipping out before he could stop them. He felt heat rise in his cheeks, a blush that would have been impossible for the Ice King, but seemed perfectly natural for the man Arya was helping him remember he could be. She smiled, and it was like watching the sun rise over the ocean. "You're sweet. Have you eaten dinner? I brought extra sandwiches." My grandmother always said that food tastes better when it's shared. This had become their ritual. Every night, Arya would arrive with a small cooler containing homemade sandwiches, fruit, and a thermos of coffee that tasted like it had been blessed by angels. She would share her simple meal with him, as if he were a beloved friend rather than a billionaire who could buy restaurants on a whim. "Tell me about your grandmother," Elias said as they settled into their usual spot in the conference room, the city lights twinkling below them like earthbound stars. "You talk about her like she's the most important person in the world." Arya's face softened with love, so pure it made Elias's chest ache. "She is. Eloise Sinclair raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 7. She was a schoolteacher in Trinidad, and she taught me everything that matters. How to be kind, how to find joy in small things, how to love without fear." "Without fear," Elias repeated, the words foreign on his tongue. "I don't think I remember how to do that." "It's not something you remember," Arya said gently, her dark eyes holding his with steady compassion. "It's something you choose every day, even when it's terrifying. Especially when it's terrifying." She told him about her grandmother's garden, where she grew the most beautiful roses in the Caribbean, about the stories Eloise would tell about her own childhood, about the way she would sing while she cooked, filling their small house with music and laughter. She spoke of a woman who had lost her husband young, but had never lost her faith in love, who had raised her granddaughter to believe that kindness was the strongest force in the universe. "She's sick now," Arya said quietly, her voice breaking slightly. "Cancer. The treatments are expensive, and I'm trying to save enough to bring her here for better care." She trailed off, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped her coffee cup. Elias felt something twist in his chest, a pain that had nothing to do with his own wounds and everything to do with hers. This woman, this angel, was working herself to exhaustion to save the person she loved most, and she was doing it with grace and dignity that humbled him. "How much?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. What? Arya looked confused. How much do you need for the treatments? For bringing her here? Elias leaned forward, his businessman's mind already calculating costs and solutions. I can. Arya's voice was firm but kind. I appreciate the thought, Elias, I really do. But I can't accept that. She's my responsibility, my family. I have to do this myself. But why? Elias couldn't understand her refusal. He had the resources to solve her problems with a single phone call, to eliminate the worry that was etching lines around her beautiful eyes. I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. Let me help you. Arya reached across the table and covered his hand with hers, her touch like electricity running through his veins. Because that's not what love is, Elias. Love isn't about having someone solve your problems for you. It's about standing beside someone while they solve their own problems, offering your strength when they're weak, your hope when they're scared. Her words hit him like a physical blow. He thought of Isabella, who had loved his money and his status, but had abandoned him the moment his strength had wavered. He thought of 30 years of relationships built on transactions rather than connection, of a life where every kindness had come with a price tag. I don't think anyone has ever loved me the way you love your grandmother, he said quietly, the admission torn from someplace deep inside him. That's not true, Arya said, her voice gentle but certain. Your sister loves you like that. I can hear it in your voice when you talk about her. And your assistant, Finian. He's protective of you in a way that goes beyond professional loyalty. Elias blinked, startled by her insight. It was true that Mira had never given up on him, despite his best efforts to push her away. And Finian had been with him for 8 years, turning down higher-paying positions to stay by his side. But he had always assumed their loyalty was based on duty or mutual benefit, not genuine care. You see things differently than I do, he said. I see people the way my grandmother taught me to see them, Arya replied. Not as they are in this moment, but as they could be if they remembered how to love themselves. You're not as alone as you think you are, Elias. You're just scared to believe that you deserve the love that's already there. They talked until nearly dawn, sharing stories that neither of them had told anyone else. Elias found himself speaking of his father, of the guilt he carried for not being able to save the family business, of the dreams he had buried along with his trust in love. Arya listened without judgment, her presence a balm to wounds that had festered for decades. When she finally left, promising to see him the next night, Elias sat alone in his office as the sun rose over Manhattan. For the first time in 30 years, he felt something that might have been peace. This woman, this miracle in cleaning clothes, was teaching him that maybe, just maybe, he was worthy of love after all. He picked up his phone and dialed his sister's number. When Mira answered, her voice heavy with sleep and concern, he said the words he hadn't spoken in years. I think I'm falling in love, and I'm terrified. The silence stretched between them, and then Mira's voice, warm with tears and hope. Tell me about her. As Elias began to speak, describing Arya's kindness, her strength, her beautiful heart, he realized that for the first time in 30 years, he was looking forward to tomorrow not because of a business deal or a corporate victory, but because tomorrow night, an angel would walk into his building again, and maybe, just maybe, she would help him remember how to be human. The Ice King was beginning to thaw, and it was the most terrifying and wonderful thing that had ever happened to him. Chapter 4. The Courage to Feel Again. Love doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It creeps into your life like morning mist, soft and subtle, until suddenly you realize you can't imagine breathing without it. 8 weeks had passed since Arya Bellamy had become the center of Elias Thornwood's universe, and the transformation was nothing short of miraculous. The man who had spent 3 decades perfecting the art of isolation found himself counting minutes until 11:30 each night, when the elevator would deliver his salvation in the form of a woman who saw his soul instead of his bank account. But love, Elias was learning, was more than stolen conversations and shared sandwiches. Love was the desperate need to ease someone's pain, even if they would never know you were the one who had lifted their burden. He sat in his office on a Tuesday morning, staring at the investigative report that Finian had discreetly commissioned. The folder contained everything about Arya's life: her grandmother's medical records, the costs of treatment, the 3 jobs she worked to make ends meet, the tiny apartment she shared with her friend, Talia Evergreen. But more than the facts, It contained the story of a woman who was slowly killing herself, trying to save the person she loved most. Eloise Sinclair's cancer was aggressive, and the treatments available in Trinidad were limited. The report estimated that bringing her to New York for experimental therapy would cost close to $200,000, money that Aria would need a lifetime to earn at her current pace. Elias had built his fortune on making difficult decisions quickly. But this was different. This wasn't about profit margins or market share. This was about the woman who had become his reason for existing, and he knew that approaching her directly would only push her away. Finian, he called to his assistant, who appeared in the doorway with the efficiency of someone who had learned to anticipate his boss's needs. "Yes, sir? I need you to set up a charitable foundation. Something focused on providing medical care for immigrants and their families. Make it legitimate, well-funded, and ensure that it can provide grants quickly and quietly." Finian's eyebrows rose slightly, but he was too professional to voice his surprise. "Of course, sir. What would you like to call it?" Elias thought of Aria's stories about her grandmother's garden, about roses that bloomed despite the harsh Caribbean sun. "The Eloise Foundation, Finian, and I want the first grant to go to a woman named Eloise Sinclair in Trinidad. Full medical coverage, transportation costs, everything she needs. I'll have the paperwork ready by tomorrow, sir." "Good. And Finian, this needs to appear completely legitimate. No connection to me or to Thornwood Industries. Can you arrange that?" "Absolutely, sir." Finian paused. "If I may ask, sir, this is about Miss Bellamy, isn't it?" Elias looked up, surprised by the question. In 8 years of working together, Finian had never pried into his personal life. "How did you?" "You're different, sir. You smile when you read her texts. You've started saying good morning to the staff. Yesterday you asked me about my weekend plans." Finian's voice was warm, with something that might have been pride. "In all the years I've worked for you, I've never seen you happy. She's good for you." "I'm terrified I'm not good for her," Elias admitted, the words coming out in a rush. "She's sunshine and hope and everything beautiful in this world, and "You're a man who's been alone for too long," Finian said gently. "But you're not the same man who hired me 8 years ago. You're not even the same man who walked into this office 2 months ago. That's what love does. It changes you, usually for the better." That night, Elias waited for Aria with the nervous energy of a teenager preparing for his first date. He had spent the day thinking about Finian's words, about the changes that loving Aria had wrought in his life. He was softer now, more aware of the people around him, more willing to see the humanity in others. When she arrived, her smile was brighter than usual, and there was something almost electric in her energy. "You look like you have good news," Elias said, his heart lifting at the sight of her joy. "I do," she said, her voice bubbling with excitement. "I got a call today from something called the Eloise Foundation. They're going to pay for my grandmother's treatment and bring her to New York for experimental therapy. Can you believe it? It's like a miracle." Elias felt his chest tighten with emotion as he watched her happiness. This was what love looked like, not the desperate need to possess someone, but the profound joy of seeing them free from worry. "That's wonderful, Aria. You must be so relieved." "I am," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I keep thinking about how my grandmother always said that when you put love out into the world, it comes back to you tenfold. I've been working so hard to save money for her treatment, and now this foundation just appears out of nowhere. It's like the universe was listening." "Tell me about her," Elias said softly, settling into his chair across from her. "What will she think of New York?" Aria's face lit up with love and anticipation. "She'll be amazed by everything. She's never been anywhere except Trinidad, but she's always been curious about the world. She used to make me tell her stories about the people I met, the places I'd been. She said that every person carries a piece of their homeland with them, and she wanted to collect those pieces like treasures." "She sounds like she raised you well," Elias said, thinking of his own grandmother, who had died when he was 12, but who had taught him about kindness before the world had taught him about cruelty. "She did. She taught me that love isn't something you hoard. It's something you share. The more you give away, the more you have." Aria reached across the table and took his hand, her touch sending electricity through his entire body. "She's going to love you, Elias. I talk about you in my letters to her, and she always asks about the lonely man who works too late and needs someone to remind him that he's not alone. You write to her about me? Elias's voice was barely above a whisper. Every week. I tell her about your kindness, about how you listen to my stories, about how you make me feel less alone in this big city. Aria's eyes were soft with affection. She says that anyone who can make her granddaughter smile the way you do must have a beautiful heart, even if he's forgotten how to see it. Elias felt tears prick his eyes, emotions he had suppressed for decades threatening to overflow. I don't know if I have a beautiful heart, Aria. I've done things. I've been cold and cruel. And that's not who you are, she interrupted firmly. That's who you became to protect yourself. But I see the real you, Elias. I see the man who stays up all night talking to the cleaning lady because he recognizes loneliness in someone else. I see the man who remembers that I mentioned my grandmother's favorite flowers and somehow finds a way to have gardenias waiting for me on particularly hard days. Elias's breath caught. He had been leaving flowers for her, always unsigned, always mysterious. He hadn't realized she knew they were from him. You knew? He asked. I hoped, she said, her smile tender. The first time I found gardenias on my cleaning cart, I thought it was a coincidence. But then it happened again and again, always on nights when I told you I was particularly worried about my grandmother. Who else would have been paying that much attention to my stories? I wanted to do more, Elias said, his voice rough with emotion. I wanted to solve everything for you, to take away all your worries and fears, but you wouldn't let me. Because that's not what love is, Aria said gently. Love isn't about having someone solve your problems for you. It's about having someone stand beside you while you solve them yourself. It's about knowing that whatever happens, you're not facing it alone. I've been alone for so long, Elias admitted. I forgot what it felt like to have someone care about my day, to worry about me, to love me. You're not alone anymore, Aria said, her voice steady and sure. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, their hands intertwined across the table, the city lights twinkling below them like promises of tomorrow. Elias realized that this was what happiness felt like, not the rush of closing a deal or the satisfaction of destroying a competitor, but the quiet contentment of being truly seen and accepted by another person. Aria, he said quietly, I need to tell you something. What is it? I think I'm falling in love with you. The words hung in the air between them, vulnerable and honest and terrifying. Aria's smile was radiant. I think I'm falling in love with you too, Elias. And it's the most beautiful feeling in the world. As they leaned across the table toward each other, their lips meeting in a kiss that was soft and sweet and full of promise, Elias felt something inside him heal. The Ice King was melting, and in his place was a man who remembered how to hope, how to trust, how to love without fear. When they finally pulled apart, both of them breathing hard, Aria rested her forehead against his. My grandmother always said that love is the only thing that makes life worth living. I never understood what she meant until now. Now I understand why you work so hard to save her, Elias said, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her cheek. She created something beautiful in you, and that beauty is changing me. We're changing each other, Aria corrected softly. That's what love does. It makes us better than we ever thought we could be. As they held each other in the quiet of the office, surrounded by the city that never slept, Elias knew that his life had been divided into two parts, before Aria and after, and the after was going to be more beautiful than anything he had ever dared to imagine. The man who had spent 30 years believing he was unworthy of love had finally found someone who saw his worth, and he was never going to let her go. Chapter 5. Falling without fear. Sometimes the most profound declarations of love come wrapped in the most ridiculous moments, proving that the heart cares nothing for dignity when it finally finds the courage to speak its truth. Elias Thornwood had spent 3 sleepless nights rehearsing what he would say to Aria Bellamy, pacing the marble floors of his penthouse like a caged tiger, crafting and discarding speeches that never seemed adequate to contain the enormity of what he felt for her. He had conquered boardrooms filled with hostile executives, had stared down senators and foreign ministers, had negotiated deals worth billions without breaking a sweat, but the thought of telling a woman in a cleaning uniform that she had become his entire world left him trembling like a schoolboy. The morning of the 4th day dawned gray and drizzling, as if the sky itself was reflecting his nervous energy. He stood before his bathroom mirror, adjusting his tie for the 100th time, practicing the words that would either change his life forever or shatter what remained of his carefully reconstructed heart. "Arya," he said to his reflection, his voice barely steady, "I know this might seem impossible, but I need you to know that you've become everything to me. You've taken a man who forgot how to feel and taught him how to love again." The words sounded hollow in the empty bathroom, lacking the warmth and sincerity he felt in his chest. How could mere language capture the way she made him feel alive for the first time in 30 years? How could he explain that her smile had become his religion, her laugh, his favorite song, her presence, the only thing that made sense in a world that had always felt cold and meaningless? By the time evening arrived, Elias was a wreck. He had canceled 3 meetings, snapped at Finian twice, and spent the entire day staring at his phone, composing and deleting text messages that never seemed to capture what he needed to say. When the clock struck 11, he positioned himself near the elevators, his prepared speech on his lips, his hands trembling with nervous energy. The elevator doors opened with their familiar chime, and Elias stepped forward, his words on his lips, but in his anxiety, in his desperate need to finally voice the feelings that had been consuming him for weeks. He approached the first figure to emerge from the elevator without really looking. "Arya," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "I need to tell you something that I should have said weeks ago. You've changed my life in ways I never thought possible. You've taken a man who was dead inside and made him remember what it means to be alive. I know I'm not worthy of someone like you, someone so good and pure and beautiful, but I'm hoping—" Sir." A confused male voice interrupted his passionate declaration. "I think you might have me confused with someone else." Elias looked up, his words dying in his throat as he realized he was staring into the bewildered face of Theo Hawthorne, the young male janitor who worked the night shift on the lower floors. The kid, he couldn't be more than 22, was staring at him with a mixture of confusion and genuine concern, his cleaning cart forgotten beside him. "I'm not Arya, sir," Theo said gently, his voice kind despite the awkwardness of the situation. "But, she's right behind me. And just so you know, what you were saying sounded really beautiful. I hope she appreciates it." Elias felt heat flood his cheeks, embarrassment mixing with nervous energy to create a cocktail of emotions that left him speechless. Behind Theo, he could see Arya emerging from the elevator, her eyes wide with surprise and something that might have been delight. "Oh my God," Elias breathed, running his hands through his hair. "I'm so sorry, Theo. I didn't mean to." "No worries, Mr. Thornwood," Theo said with a grin that suggested he was enjoying the unprecedented sight of his usually composed boss, completely flustered. "I've been mistaken for a lot of things, but never for a beautiful woman. That's a first." Arya approached them, her expression soft with affection as she took in Elias's mortified state. "It's okay, Theo. I'll take it from here." "Good luck, Miss Bellamy," Theo said, giving her an encouraging smile before heading toward the service elevator. "I think you're going to like what he has to say." As Theo disappeared around the corner, Elias and Arya stood alone in the marble hallway, the weight of his aborted declaration hanging between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. Elias had never felt more vulnerable, more exposed, more terrified of what might happen next. "So," Arya said, her voice gentle and warm, "did you have something you wanted to tell me?" Elias looked at her, really looked at her, and felt his heart skip a beat. She was wearing her usual cleaning uniform, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, her face free of makeup. She was beautiful in the way that sunrise was beautiful, in the way that rain was beautiful, in the way that hope was beautiful after a long season of despair. "I'm in love with you," he said, the words tumbling out without preamble or poetry. "I'm desperately, completely, utterly in love with you, and I needed you to know." Arya's breath caught, her eyes filling with tears that sparkled like diamonds in the hallway lights. "Elias." "I know it's crazy," he continued, the words pouring out of him like water from a broken dam. "I know I'm too old for you, too damaged, too set in my ways. I know I have no right to ask someone like you to love someone like me. But I can't keep pretending that what I feel for you is friendship or gratitude or anything other than the most profound love I've ever experienced." He stepped closer, his hands reaching for hers. his voice dropping to a whisper. "You've saved me, Arya. You've taken a man who was drowning in his own bitterness and taught him how to breathe again. You've shown me that the world can be beautiful, that people can be good, that love doesn't have to be a weapon used to destroy." "You're not too old," Arya said softly, her tears flowing freely now. "You're not too damaged. You're not too anything. You're just a man who's been hurt, who's been alone, who's forgotten how beautiful he is." "I don't feel beautiful," Elias admitted, his voice breaking. "I feel like I'm made of sharp edges and broken glass. I feel like I'll hurt you just by loving you." Arya reached up and cupped his face in her hands, her touch gentle and warm and infinitely precious. "Love isn't about being perfect, Elias. It's about being real. It's about trusting someone with your broken pieces and letting them help you put them back together. I've never trusted anyone the way I trust you," he said, leaning into her touch. "I've never wanted to be worthy of someone the way I want to be worthy of you." "You already are worthy," she whispered, her thumbs brushing away tears he hadn't realized were falling. "You've been worthy all along. You just needed someone to help you remember." "I love you," he said again, the words feeling like a prayer, like a vow, like the most important thing he had ever said. "I love your kindness, your strength, your beautiful heart. I love the way you see the world, the way you make me want to be better than I am."